start with a welcome note by Ms. Lucia Schäuber. She is Senior Policy Officer, Division Sustainable Textile Supply Chains and Sustainable Consumption at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And within BMZ, she is responsible for the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles and Sustainable Consumption. We'll follow then with a short introduction on the work of the MSI working group and the work of the Sustainable Terms of Trading initiatives, followed by a panel discussion with some excellent panelists that we're really glad that we have them all on board here. That is Mr. Shamim Fasli Isham, welcome. He is board member of the International Apparel Federation, director of the Bangladesh Employers Federation, second vice president at the Bangladesh Knitwear Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and owner and CEO of Fatula Apparels and member of the Sustainable Terms of Trading Initiative. Next to Mr. Ishan, we have Joy Roeterdink. She is leading the CSR department at Suit Supply, a European menswear retailer, and she has studied fashion technology at the Amsterdam Fashion Institute and sustainability in business at the Cambridge University, and priorly worked in product buying and development roles before making a switch to CSR 6 years ago. In her role, she focuses at the full ESG spectrum, centered around supply chain impact, and Suit Supply has been working on good supplier relationships since its start. Suit Supply is one of Fair Wear members already since over 15 years. And we also have on our panel Sandra Kurger. She is CR manager at Aldi Süd. She has been working at the International CR department for more than 4 years already and brings previous experience in international development and cooperation on the job. In her work, she focuses on human rights in textiles and shoe supply chain with a strong focus on responsible purchasing practice. So we're very happy to have you all here and are looking forward to an interesting and hopefully interesting for the audience as well conversation, and we'll hope to address your questions. After the conversation, we'll have some time for taking questions also from the audience before wrapping up at 11. So I'd like to get started and would like to give the floor to Ms. Schäuber.
Thank you. I'm also very pleased to welcome you all. I see there's 97 participants already here to today's session. And the issue of sustainable garment and footwear supply chains, human rights due diligence, and also strengthening textile producing countries is one of the major concerns of our ministry. And inequalities, whether in terms of resources, information or power, really prevent equal opportunities for all and also enable exploitative conditions. Especially along textile supply chains, we can witness great inequalities. While regulated working conditions and fair wages are the norm at one end of the supply chain, at the other end, people are really struggling against the violation of basic human rights. So the BMZ sees itself as a transformation ministry that works together with partners on the ground to really change structures in partner countries and globally so that a better life for everyone is possible. And this is also why our minister, Svenja Schulze, has set the topic of just transition, meaning shaping the global transformation in a just way and promoting good work and social justice as one of her top priorities on the agenda. And obviously for workers in countries of the global south, fair living wage and fair working hours are part of that better life. And I guess, as you all know, to get there, we have to change many things. And first and foremost, I think companies really have to work on their purchasing practices. Those who change orders at short notice, do not pay for deliveries on time or incompletely, and do not build trusting relationships with their suppliers really reinforce sector risks. And this then indirectly encourages excessive working hours, low wages, and it also prevents the business relationship on equal footing. And then obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has really demonstrated clearly how essential good and reliable purchasing practices and also resilient supply chains really are. And with the STTI white paper on commercial compliance and the common framework for responsible purchasing practices, documents have been designed that help companies to sustainably work on their purchasing practices. And we as BMZ very much welcome the fact that the common framework, which is based on the white paper in many respects, has really set itself the goal of becoming the reference document that leads buyers and suppliers to an equal partnership. And in the textile partnership, as well as in the green button, we really sense the will of companies to intensively work on their purchasing practices. But we also hear that there's a lot of catching up to do, and also concerns about the feasibility of sustainable purchasing practices all along the supply chain. And this is why I'm very pleased that GIZ, STTI, and the MSI working group have invited us today, and I hope for fruitful discussions all around purchasing practices and buyer-supplier relations. And with that, I give back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Scherber, and thank you for reminding us indeed of the importance of this topic, the topic of today's discussion, responsible purchasing practices, but above all, a changed relation. That is what we are looking for, a changed relation between buyer and supplier, because we all know there is this power imbalance and we need to create the conditions to make sure that this balance will be shifting, because as Ms. Scherber also very well indicated, purchasing practices have an impact on working conditions in the factories, and that is what we are all looking for, is to improve those working conditions. A few words then on the MSI working group and the work that we've done to get at the common framework for responsible purchasing practices. As we felt there was not enough impact on improving purchasing practices, and we felt it is a very important topic to better align on, to create more common language on, in the hope to have more impact. We sat together with the organizations that you now see on your screen, the Ethical Trading Initiative, the Danish Ethical Trading Initiative, the Norwegian Ethical Trading Initiative, the Dutch Agreement for Sustainable Garments, and the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, and the Fair Wear Foundation. And throughout our discussions, where we have mapped all available frameworks from not only those organizations, but also from others, and research documents, we've had support and consulted also with ACT, Amfori, Better Buying Institute, and Better Work, who have been participating also within this working group. And we came to a set of common languages, a set of principles. And this group, of course, shares the vision on the need for a responsibility for a brand and the need for stakeholder involvement in everything. That is our common denominator. And we came to this set of principles with, first of all, integration and reporting, because we really feel it is important that throughout the whole company there is awareness on the relevance of purchasing practices. The second principle is equal partnership, because we feel that a respectful sourcing dialogue, what we are talking about, is definitely part of responsible purchasing practices. We feel there's a need to improve on collaborative production planning and to improve on information sharing, better forecasting, better predictability, especially for manufacturers. A fourth important principle that we defined is the fair payment terms, to make sure there is a better and improved risk sharing that we all know currently in the system within the garment and textile is imbalanced. And as fifth principle, we defined sustainable costing. It sounds maybe even obvious, but of course the prices should cover the costs. And by that we also mean the true costs, including also living wages. We have, most of you might have seen about those principles in the past months, because we have been actively gathering supplier feedback, not only, but also stakeholder feedback from different organizations. And we are currently working on integrating this, where we think it will improve and make the principles a bit stronger. And we soon will start with the learning and implementation community with brands to really implement those principles and learn from the feasibility of it in practice. So with these words, I'd like to invite Matthijs to also share a bit about the work that he's been able to do with the Sustainable Terms of Trading Initiative and the group of suppliers.
Thank you, Margreet. Yes, and let me, before we go into the discussion and hear about what's happening where it really matters with the companies about STTI. This is a global initiative. It's a unique one because it's driven by 15 apparel manufacturing associations from 11 countries. I'm going to name them really quickly. So we have Morocco, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and China. And the goal of the STTI is to deliver, as it says here, major contribution towards better purchasing practices that actually allow textile and garment manufacturers to run a socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable operation, all centered around the concept of commercial compliance. And commercial compliance, we defined as those purchasing practices that do not cause obvious and avoidable harm to manufacturers. It's important that what STTI set out to do is to give the manufacturer's perspective on purchasing practices. And we used the term compliance on purpose because it explains, it says that compliance goes both ways. This is the essence of an equal partnership. There's an equal division of risks, rewards, and also responsibilities among the buyers and the suppliers. So the commercial compliance defines those purchasing practices that are essential for manufacturers. This initiative is led by combining two groups of manufacturer associations, one that was and is brought together by the STAR network, the other one brought together by the members of the International Apparel Federation, the IAF, of which I am Secretary General, the Better Buying Institute, and very importantly, supported by GIZ, the Gesellschaft für Internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ Fabric Project. All right, next slide, please. So what we did, first, STTI published a white paper. This contains 3 major sections. The key recommendations are those central elements of the sustainable terms of trade that define commercial compliance. And as Margreet said, quite often they're quite obvious. You wonder, is this not already happening? This seems to be normal ethical trading practice, but that's the whole thing. It isn't always. And it's important from the manufacturer's perspective to list it. Further recommendations are a similar list of purchasing practices that would really be good if they were more common. So it's an additional wish list. But because we realize this is really a tough and complex topic, there's also a lot of work to be done on finding out innovative solutions to improve purchasing practices. And we are actually hosting a list of research questions that we invite other organizations to work on. Now, the great thing is, at this moment, it's really pretty momentous that we have large groups of organizations collaborating and then collaborating even with each other. So STTI and the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing Practices have started this collaboration. Of course, we have the same goal of improving purchasing practices, but we cover all bases, all perspectives. This is not just ideas and words. A large proportion of what is written in the white paper has been incorporated into the common framework. They're not identical, but they're close to, and there's a lot of collaboration there already actively being done. Then, of course, the solutions are really important. How to get to those better purchasing practices. and the discussion there is going, and that's one of the things that is more concrete are the learning and implementation communities, where we are actually planning to have buyers, brands, and retailers and manufacturers together to see how they can also learn from each other on the road to improvement of purchasing practices. So this was a brief overview of STTI. Now I think it's time to start our panel, and I'd like to pass the word back to you, Margreet, to start the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Matthijs. And I like the fact that we are moderating this discussion together. It's also to express that we actually think it's an important milestone that we as MSI Group, with our member brands on board, but with our stakeholders in our governance structures, are discussing this really important topic with the group's supplier organizations to together see if we can drive towards an industry consensus at this ambitions level of what responsible purchasing practices, responsible purchasing practices look like. Let's start with Ishan, because we are curious to hear also from your perspective as a factory owner and CEO, and as part of the BKMEA, what is the added value for you of an industry consensus on what good practices look like, and what kind of opportunities do you think it will give you to engage in a different relationship with buyers?
Thank you, Margaret. For me, the good purchasing practices should be fair in every state, not only in the buying side, but also in the not only in the manufacturing side, but also in the buying side and in all the perspective, like payment terms, what Matthijs actually mentioned in last presentation, the order forecasting, long-term business relationship, and of course the fair price. But everything should be combined in the good purchasing practice. It should be include the risk analysis, the strategy, forecasting, and that should be the respect between the purchasing company and the supplier, and the common regular dialogue. And of course, the forecasting means the production planning should be done collaboratively between the parties. And if there is any change, it should be mutual. So these actually, for me, the good purchasing practice look like.
Thanks a lot. So let me move then to one of the representatives of the brands that we have today here. Joy, can I first ask you, from a brand perspective, what is for you the added value of this common language? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, struggling with the button.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned, sort of introducing this question, I think is very vital to this answer as well, because there are, of course, huge power imbalances in the industry, brands sort of pretending to be on top of the chain. And I think having a consensus on what good practices look like and having a common understanding between all these parties will actually help indeed restore those power imbalances. And yeah, I really think that if I look at us and how we prioritize relationships and long-term suppliers and having an honest and open dialogue, it actually really helps with predictability on both sides. I think COVID has all showed us that it's super important to have a constant stream of supplies, and that disruptions can be very, very difficult for both suppliers, but also brands. So I think having that open and honest dialogue and those terms on more equal terms will really help helping restoring as well going forward. Now we're sort of entering hopefully the end of COVID.
Yeah, that is a very important comment on the current situation indeed. And predictability, security is indeed important for both sides of the relationship, of course. We know the garment industry is having a lot of different players, so there's a lot of different type of brands. So I'm curious to hear also from Ms. Kurger, Sandra, what would it mean for Aldi, this common framework, and what kind of opportunities do you think it will give you in the relationships with your suppliers?
Yeah, thank you, Margriet. So like with many other sustainability topics, for the topic of responsible purchasing practices and the common framework, we feel that dialogue and involvement of all relevant stakeholders is really key here to ensure a mutual understanding and also a mutual implementation of improvements. I think this quite nicely links to what Eshan also said, like the joint collaboration is so important here. This is why we as Aldi very much welcome really that STTI joined this conversation with a very strong voice of the manufacturer's perspective, which is so important in this discussion. Because from our feeling is like previously the discussion was mostly on analyzing purchasing practices, sort of asking importers and factories, what are the current gaps? Where do you see gaps? But now really the discussion is more about, okay, really focusing and detailing the discussion, not only talking about better planning and forecasting, but really saying, what does that mean? How can we make it measurable? And how can we also implement this? So really the added value that we see here is obviously also in the context of upcoming supply chain legislation, that there is more detail to the discussion and that there is an equal level playing field added to the discussion.
Thanks very much. Matthijs, over to you.
Now the moderator has to unmute himself as well. Sorry. I think, Sandra, you gave a fantastic bridge when you said, when you mentioned the word implementation, right? So analyzing first is really important. Measuring, you know, I heard what gets measured gets done, but what gets done, right? So I'd like to turn to you, to Ehsan, and to ask you, you know, knowing that this power imbalance is still there, right, between buyers and suppliers, and yes, a common understanding of what good purchasing practices are is really important. But what really, in your mind and in your experience, needs to happen for the situation to improve for you as a manufacturer? What changes need to happen on the ground for you to get those better purchasing practices?
No, this is true. Right at the moment, it is buyer-driven market, but to make it more balanced, we have to increase the relationship between buyers and the suppliers. And it could be by develop more and more dialogue to understand the points of the difficulties faces by both the parties. And as you've seen in the total of the supply chain, if you consider, the only 10 to 11% actually is from the supplier side, and balance 88-90% is from the buyer side, like the logistics and in the validation chain. I'm talking of the validation chain. So the thing is, in DESA actually is more dominated from the buyer side. So there is usually not from the all buyer. I'm not talking about the big buyers, but most of the small and medium buyer. There is some dominating thought from the buyer side when they said that all the terms and conditions. So this could be this should be changed. How they thought about the in the supply chain. This should be more mutual, and buyers often they revise the terms and condition of the order even after they finalize the order. So this is the something that we need to address, and other than this, there are some points which we talk like the force measures what we faces in the COVID times, which actually become very serious even at the beginning of 2020. So there might be force measure, but at least they should share the cost which is already produced. But we have found in the beginning of 2020 that some buyers didn't respect these ethical issues. So by recognizing the problem, the solution from the both side, actually we can serve better. That's what actually my points.
Yeah, that's really good. We'll summarize later, but I understand that actually the mutual understanding is part of the implementation as well, because the mutual understanding of what kind of behavior causes what kind of problems on the manufacturer end is an important way to actually change that behavior on the ground. I'd like to ask you one brief question, Ehsan, before I turn back to Margreet, and that is, we have been saying that purchasing practices are related to other aspects of sustainability, including environmental sustainability and labor relations. Can you sort of support that statement? Do you notice in your daily practice that the purchasing practices that you face are holding you back, are preventing you from making certain investments?
Yes, of course, because this is everyday issue for me. Like if I divide your question in two points, one is the labor issues and of course the sustainable production issue. And what I mentioned, what is the good practice, purchasing practice? Good forecasting and the fair price and the good negotiation skill and the good terms and condition. So if you see if I choose the forecasting issue, you see when we receive the order, maybe we are working with one buyer for the long term, even for the 16 years, 17 years, but there is no long-term predictability from the buyer side. So what happened? We are always shaky to hiring our workers for the permanent terms condition, and we are sometimes shaky to increase their benefit because we don't know what will happen after 6 months. So we always try to give them as per law, but not the extra benefit, because we don't know if we give the extra benefit, either it can be sustainable or not, even after 6 months, because we don't have any good forecasting of the order. So, and some buyers, I'm not talking about the big buyers, but most of the buyers actually, they give not long forecasting and they take the seasonal order. So what happened in some month of the year, we got more overtime. So this might create working pressure or stress over the worker. And some month there is no overtime. So what happened? The worker also cannot plan well about the financial planning. So this sometimes create mental stress to the worker also. So that's how actually forecasting can even help the working condition or the worker's life. And of course the fair price, because you see the manufacturer have to carry all the cost of the incurred in maintaining social compliance with laborers, decent wages, health safety issue, and the safety standard, building, fire, structural, there is a lot of cost occurred by the supplier. But if we don't get the fair prices, so which might affect the wages and safety issue, we cannot give them the fair wages, we cannot give them the living wages, we are always stuck with the minimum wages. So this can be changed when the purchasing practice, if it is in the fair way, then of course the worker and the workforce life can be better. And the sustainable production, your second question, if everything is fair, if the price is good, if the buyer is concerned about even to the cotton producer, how the cotton actually produced, or how the man-made fiber is produced, then if they take care about these things, then it is always sustainable for every way. We can go for the organic cotton, we can go for the recycled polyester, and the whole industry will be sustainable in this way. So of course this is linked with the worker and the sustainable production issues.
Thanks, Ehsan. So there is indeed a clear link, and this need for more predictability, more security, more collaborative planning is very obvious to make sure there's also more security for the workers in the supply chain. On the other hand, as we know, as I also started off in the introduction, this particular industry is very characterized by this power imbalance and by sometimes maybe, irrespectful behavior between the different parties within the supply chain, where there is way too much room for people to get away with not abiding by the rules. It's a very competitive industry. Joy, with the introduction also of you for this panel, you said that Suit Supply has always invested in more sustainable relationship with suppliers. What was needed within the company to do this differently?
Well, I think that this is something that we've been doing sort of since the beginning. We've always looked at supplier relationships as basically vital for the existence of our company. If there's not a secure supply of quality products within our standards, then we as a brand don't have anything to hang in our stores or to sell on our web shop, and then there's literally nothing that's happening there. So this has never been a thing for us that it's not that case. We of course make suiting, so we are less prone to seasonability, etc., etc. But it's at the same time also a choice that you make as a company. It's not necessarily that it comes naturally. And I think what's really important is that companies in the industry need to be bold enough to envision a more long-term vision. And actually not just having that vision themselves, but actually also taking their suppliers in with that vision and communicating that vision. Again, COVID's a great example. That was really a time where we had to sit down with suppliers and said, okay, supply is severely disrupted, our shops are closed, but what do you need in order to survive and to break even? So we kept on producing, although our investors weren't necessarily super happy with that because there was not a need with our full warehouses. But we also had to communicate that vision to them and said, well, we have to envision a period after COVID where both we need to survive, but also the suppliers need to survive, because otherwise, what are we going to do? And that is actually one of the things that helped us recover already so much compared to 1 or 2 years ago. So I think that's very important. And predictability actually works both ways. It's to me, it's crazy that suppliers aren't getting plannings 6 months, 12 months ahead, and having really clear numbers there, and that there's also purchasing contracts in place that actually secure those numbers. So if you don't, potentially can order those things that you'll still have to pay. That might sound like very scary to a lot of brands, but that kind of loyalty really helps you in the long term and in the end going forward. And it also actually requires a brand to have a real deep understanding of suppliers' capacities and what you need. And of course, this is very different when you work with suppliers where you have 1 or 2% leverage. But we really clearly chose to have a lot higher leverage. I think at our top 10 suppliers that produce almost 90% of our products, we have 60 to 99% leverage. With that, we actually need to have that deep understanding of their capacities. We need to have a real deep understanding of forecasting both ways. And that price needs to be good because you want suppliers to be financially healthy, not just because they need to pay their workers a good price, especially in our case, that's important for quality, but also because you want healthy suppliers in the long term. Because if they're not healthy and you're squeezing them out, it will hurt you as well. So I think that understanding that and creating more equal partnerships and where you have a common understanding on what is needed actually really helps you. And in our case, when giving better prices to suppliers, it also means that on my side, we can ask more and we can actually work together more on CSR related projects when it comes to living wage, when it comes to gender, when it comes to all kinds of things. So it's a much more healthier construction in the long term. But if you only work, you give your suppliers weeks, months, or maybe 6 months ahead some orders, and there's never a guarantee that the next season you'll work with them again, then there's no common ground to build on. So I think that's super essential to all of this.
What does this mean? Because what I hear you say is that actually the placing of orders is not only driven by the sales figures or the sales forecast. What does this mean for the relation internally within Food Supply between the buyer colleagues and the CSR colleagues?
Well, I mean, of course, normally it is sales driven, but you need to also understand that if you have, in our case, 128 stores worldwide, and you understand the sales figures, that you can actually plan ahead for the years, how that would look like. And already communicating those numbers with your suppliers is very important. So they have a lot more security to move with you going forward. Yes, but I think so that's definitely COVID related, but in general, that's of course very important. But what it also means is, for example, when we talk about forecasting and we do all that kind of stuff, but we still see excessive overtime in audits, that there is an open link between CSR departments and buying departments, where there is like, hey, you know, how is it possible? We work according to these systems, but they still see a lot of excessive overtime. Can we go through everything and see if there's anything on our side that we need to improve? So I think that relationship and making sure that CSR departments, but also and buying departments are basically the same thing and have an open communication about things that are happening are very essential, because unfortunately a lot of companies, you still see those things operating separately, where buyers are, you know, placing orders, trying to get their target wage, and on the other hand you have CSR departments that are saying, well, you know, we need to do another audit, and also we need to do another improvement project. So you can never do inclusive costing and understanding root causes of issues if you don't work together at firm side.
So a level of awareness throughout the company is very important, but also the communication between the different departments. Sandra, I'd really love to hear a bit more from you. How is that within Aldi Süd? How was the route that you took to change or to make changes in your purchasing practices and in the relationship with your suppliers?
Yeah, well, let me get started by maybe explaining why we started the discussion on responsible purchasing practices, and then I'll go into how we sort of went on that journey. Basically, what we've been seeing in the last couple of years is that a lot of research, very clear research on what positive impact responsible purchasing practices can have on both social and environmental sustainability came about. I mean, we all saw ACT papers, we saw better buying. So it was very clear the positive impact we as Aldi, what we're doing in our headquarters can have. On top of that, we've seen MSIs really taking up that work, and obviously now, which we very much welcome due to this relevance of the topic, we're seeing that legislation is also taking up that topic. So this is sort of the background or the context in which we started that journey. So a couple of years, I think like 3 years ago, we focused and really started the analysis within the business. That was the very first step. So really analyzing where do we currently see the gaps. And for this, it was very important to us to do a holistic analysis. Holistic means that we asked sort of everyone in the business who was involved in the buying process. So really starting from buyers, designers, quality department, and above all hierarchy levels, to ask them, where do you currently see yourself? So we used the ACT questionnaire that was kindly provided by the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles to us. And as a next step, we then also asked our importers and selected factories that the importers work with. And for this, I think it is very important to understand our buying model. So as Aldi, we do work with an indirect buying model, which means that we purchase products from importers, and that importers again then have a direct relationship with factories. This is why it was so important for us to really look at this whole thing holistically and to get everyone across the purchasing process really involved in that. And basically from there, we understood, okay, where are our key gaps and where do we now need to get started to actually make improvements? And we started to make improvements in really getting everyone aware. I think this was a point that you just mentioned, really the point of awareness, taking everyone along the journey. So we started with training. We developed an e-learning that we also provided to other members of the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles to really provide that to all buying departments to get a mutual understanding. Again, here, a joint understanding of what are we actually talking about. We need a joint vocabulary, like what is this that we mean by responsible purchasing practices? And this is sort of how we did the awareness raising. And here we do really see collaboration is key, right? This is not a CR topic. This is a topic that really spans across the whole business and has really a disruptive character, I would say, really like breaking up old processes and changing them. And basically after this awareness raising point, we obviously need to get into the implementation phase. So what we are doing is we have an annual CR supplier evaluation. We do evaluate all of our importers that we're working with based on their CR management system. And this has a relevance in the buying decision. So that is one very important point for us to really focus business on well-performing importers. Then the second point is we came up with responsible exit strategy, which is also obviously a very important point in the whole responsible purchasing practices discussion. And here also, again, it was very important that this paper is not a CR paper that we did. It was a joint collaboration with the buying department to come up with that. How can we very clearly and transparently communicate in a case of an exit, if it happens, and how can we ensure that human rights are respected when it comes to factory level also. And so these were basically the steps that we did last year. And now when we look sort of in the future, the steps that we want to take this year is going into open costing. So that is what we're currently planning, and also having a buyer scorecard. That's, I think, what we also touched upon before. Really, buyers need to understand and need to be scored too on these KPIs. And yeah, this is sort of what the journey looks like at the moment, and which is a key pillar also of our international CR strategy. So due to the relevance of the topic, we have put that at the core of our international CR strategy. And we realize this is a long-term process. This is all about continuous improvement. And this is nothing that we will sort of finalize in the end of next year and we're done. Like, this is really a long journey for us.
Yeah, it is a journey, and it's interesting to hear that you as a company started with awareness raising among their own colleagues, and with this system where you also have some indirect parties between you and the real manufacturers. It's interesting to hear that you have opened up to hear and gather also feedback from them, to hear about your practices and what you could improve, and to enter into that discussion. And it's a journey.